there is a practice that almost every long-enduring tradition of human wisdom has independently arrived at, in different vocabularies with different theological framings, in cultures that had no contact with each other and across periods of history separated by thousands of years. The practice goes by many names: contemplation in the European monastic tradition, meditation in the various streams of the East, hesychia in the early Christian desert mothers and fathers, stillness in the contemplative streams of Sufism, sitting in the most direct of the Zen formulations. The names are different, the metaphysical frameworks behind the names are different, but the practice itself, the actual interior thing that the practitioners are doing, is recognizably the same across all of these traditions. And the fact that so many independent traditions arrived at the same practice is one of the most significant pieces of evidence we have for the practice's actual effects. Something happens when a human being sits, in deliberate quiet, returning attention to attention itself, for sustained periods. Something specific. Something the traditions kept independently discovering because the something was real and not constructed by the framework around it. And the something, when it is allowed to do its work over time, produces changes in the human interior that no other intervention has been shown to produce as reliably or as deeply. This essay is about the practice, about what it actually is beneath the cultural costumes the various traditions have dressed it in, about what is happening mechanically in the nervous system and the mind during the practice, about the specific findings that the modern empirical literature has begun to produce about its effects. Findings that, in many cases, are simply the rediscovery in scientific vocabulary of what the contemplative traditions had been describing in their own vocabulary for centuries, and about what the practice has to do with the deeper psychology of becoming a more developed, more integrated, more genuinely present human being. Let's begin by stripping away some of the misconceptions, because the modern conversation around this practice has accumulated a layer of confusion that prevents most people from approaching it accurately. The practice is not relaxation. Relaxation may occur during it and is sometimes a side effect, but it is not the point. People who approach the practice expecting relaxation and who treat the practice as a stress reduction technique usually quit within a few months because the practice does not consistently produce relaxation and frequently produces, in its early stages, the opposite. The practice is not the cultivation of positive states of mind. Positive states may arise during it and may even, over time, become more common in a practitioner's daily life, but the practice itself is not aimed at producing them. The practice is not the achievement of some special state, the famous emptiness of mind, the supposed transcendence, the various altered states that the popular conversation has associated with it. These descriptions are mostly distortions of marginal experiences that occasional practitioners have had, and they have produced an enormous amount of confusion about what the practice is actually for. What is the practice, then? In its essential form, stripped of every cultural overlay, the practice is this: the deliberate, sustained, gentle return of attention to a chosen point of focus, the breath, a word, a sensation, a posture, for periods of time long enough that the return becomes the dominant activity of the mind during the period. The mind wanders. This is what the mind does. The practice does not attempt to prevent the wandering. The practice simply, when the wandering is noticed, returns the attention to the chosen focus. Again, and again, and again. The returning is the practice, not the not wandering, the returning. And the practice, done consistently over weeks and months and years, produces specific changes in the structure of attention itself. Not in the content of attention, in the structure, in the underlying capacity to direct attention deliberately rather than being directed by it. And this change in the structure of attention is what produces the cascade of other changes that the traditions described and the modern empirical literature has begun to document. Why is this change so consequential? Because attention is, in a precise and underestimated sense, the primary instrument through which every other capacity of the mind operates. Thinking depends on attention. Feeling depends on attention. Acting depends on attention. The quality of every cognitive and emotional operation a human being performs is downstream of the quality of the attention being brought to it. And in the ordinary, untrained state, attention is almost entirely involuntary. It is captured by whatever in the environment is most stimulating, whatever in the interior is most pressing, whatever in the stream of thought is most insistent. The person operating in this state is not exactly directing their life. They are being directed by a series of attentional captures that they did not consciously choose. The quality of their thinking, feeling, and acting reflects the quality of the captures, not any deliberate organization of their own. They are, in the most literal sense, run by their attention rather than running it. The practice changes this, slowly, without drama, without the announcements that the modern self-improvement industry has trained us to expect from interventions. Over time, the structure of attention develops a different default. The attention becomes, in small but accumulating ways, more directable. The capacity to return attention to a chosen object, developed in formal practice, generalizes gradually into the capacity to return attention to a chosen object in daily life. The conversation you are actually having rather than the imagined conversation that pulled you out of the actual one. The task you are actually performing rather than the various open loops your mind is also processing while you are supposedly performing the task. The feeling you are actually having rather than the thoughts about the feeling that have replaced the feeling. The development is not dramatic in any single moment. It is dramatic when you look back across the cumulative differences that it has produced over a long enough time. If something in this is starting to land, take a second now and subscribe. The work we do here goes to the depth where the actual changes occur, not the surface where most of the modern conversation about these practices is being held. Subscribe and hit the bell. Let's keep going. There is a particular finding from the modern empirical literature that is worth pausing on, because it captures the structural significance of what the practice does in language that has not been theologically inflected. Researchers studying long-term practitioners of contemplative practice have observed measurable changes in the brain regions associated with attention regulation, emotional regulation, and self-referential thought. The changes are not small. They are not subtle. They are visible on imaging in the structure of the regions themselves. The practitioners' brains have, across years of practice, developed differently from the brains of non-practitioners. The capacity that the practice was cultivating produced, at the structural level, the physical instantiation of that capacity. The practice was not merely an exercise. The practice was a sustained input that the brain was, over years, adapting to, and the adaptations are real, measurable, and consequential for the daily functioning of the people whose brains have undergone them. This finding is significant for two reasons. The first is that it provides empirical confirmation of what the traditions had been claiming for millennia, that the practice produces lasting changes in the practitioner, not merely temporary states during the practice itself. The second, and the more interesting, is that it gives us a framework for understanding why the practice is so different from other interventions in the human interior. Most interventions, therapy in many of its forms, self-help techniques, motivational practices, lifestyle changes, produce effects that depend on continued application of the intervention. Stop doing the intervention and the effect fades. The practice, when it is done with sufficient sustained engagement, produces a different kind of effect. Produces structural change. The capacities developed remain because they have been written into the physical and functional architecture of the brain. The practitioner who has done the work for 10 years does not have to perform the work continuously to retain its effects. The effects are now part of how they operate. This is the deepest practical reason that the contemplative traditions have prized this practice so consistently across cultures. The other practices that human beings undertake to improve themselves require continuous application. This one, undertaken with sufficient depth, produces alterations in the operating system itself. And once the operating system has been altered, every subsequent operation runs on the altered system, which means the effects compound. The improved attention regulation produces over years an improved capacity to think clearly, which produces better decisions, which produce better outcomes, which produce a life that is, in its cumulative shape, organized differently from the life that the unaltered operating system was producing. The practice does not give you a better life. The practice changes the system that produces your life, and the life that comes from the changed system is different in ways that no surface intervention could replicate. Let's get specific about what the practice produces in the experience of the person doing it, because the structural language is accurate, but it is also abstract. Here is what changes in the order in which the changes typically arrive. The first thing that changes is the awareness of how the mind actually operates. Before the practice, most people have a fairly idealized sense of their own thinking. They believe that they are thinking deliberately, that their attention is under their control, that their reactions are considered, that their mental life is something like the orderly internal monologue that they imagine it to be. The practice destroys this illusion within the first few weeks. The mind, observed for sustained periods, is revealed to be enormously more chaotic, more involuntary, more reactive than the surface picture had suggested. The thoughts arrive without invitation. The associations chain themselves in directions you did not choose. The attention is yanked from object to object by forces that have nothing to do with your stated priorities. The practice is, in its early stages, primarily the experience of seeing this clearly for the first time. And the seeing is not pleasant. The seeing is humbling in a way that the surface picture had been protecting you from. But the seeing is necessary because nothing about the system can be changed until the system is accurately seen. The second thing that changes, after some months of consistent practice, is the relationship between attention and reactivity. In the ordinary state, attention is captured by emotional content the moment the emotional content arises. An irritation arises and the attention is immediately consumed by the irritation. A worry arises and the attention is immediately consumed by the worry. The captures are so fast and so automatic that the person experiences them not as captures but as the mind doing its proper work. The practice, by developing the capacity to return attention to the chosen object even when other things are arising in the field, slowly weakens the automatic capture. The irritation arises and is noticed. The attention does not have to follow it. The worry arises and is noticed. The attention does not have to be consumed. The space between the arising and the attentional capture is the space in which freedom lives, and the practice is the only reliable method humans have found for widening that space over time. The third thing that changes is the relationship between thought and self. In the ordinary state, the thoughts that arise in the mind are experienced as the self-thinking. There is no perceived gap between the thought and the thinker. The thought is what the thinker is doing. The practice, over years, produces a different relationship. The thoughts are observed to arise on their own, without your deliberate production of them. They appear in the field of awareness, persist for a moment, and dissolve. They are not, in the most precise sense, you. They are events occurring in the field that you are. And once this distinction has become not a concept but a felt understanding, once you have genuinely experienced the difference between the thoughts that occur and the awareness in which they occur, your relationship to the contents of your own mind changes permanently. You take the thoughts less personally. You identify with them less completely. You can examine them, evaluate them, discard the ones that are not useful, in a way that the person who is fully merged with their thoughts cannot. This is one of the most consequential developments the practice produces, because it means that the unhelpful thoughts that your mind continues to produce, the self-critical ones, the anxious ones, the obsessive ones, lose their grip on you. They are still produced. They are no longer authoritative. And the difference between produced and authoritative is the difference between being run by your mind and running it. The fourth thing that changes, and this is the change that the traditions tended to consider the most important, even though the modern literature is only beginning to be able to discuss it, is the underlying texture of the experience of being alive. The ordinary state of mind is, for most people, a kind of low-grade restlessness. There is always something slightly off, something to be improved, something to be feared, something to be sought, something to be avoided. The mind is rarely at rest. The mind is in continuous low-level motion, oriented toward what is not yet here, away from what is. The practice, over a long enough time, alters this. The texture of the underlying experience becomes more often simply present, not in some special enlightened sense. In the ordinary sense that what is happening right now is what you are aware of being in, without the continuous low-level pull toward the elsewhere. This is not a state the practice produces during sittings and that disappears afterward. This is a slow alteration in the default tone of consciousness itself, accumulated through years of the practice teaching the system that it is possible to simply be here, now, in this. And the alteration, once established, produces a quality of life that is genuinely different from the quality of life produced by the continuously restless mind. Now let's address the question that almost everyone who hears this description asks. If the practice is so consequential, why is it so rare for people to actually undertake it? Why have so many people heard of meditation, briefly tried meditation, and never developed an actual practice? The answer is structural, and it is worth understanding because the answer points at exactly the obstacle that has to be navigated. The practice is unrewarding in the short term. This is the simple, unflattering, structurally accurate description of its difficulty. The modern environment is calibrated for short-term reward. Every activity competes for human attention by promising some near-immediate payoff. The practice promises nothing immediate. The early weeks and months feel, mostly, like sitting around watching your mind not cooperate. The visible payoff for the time invested is essentially nothing. The reward, when it eventually arrives slowly, in the form of changes that are difficult to attribute to any single sitting and that only become visible across long enough periods that most people have already given up before the rewards become visible to them. This means that the practice cannot be sustained on the basis of expected short-term return. The practice can only be sustained on the basis of a commitment to it that is more or less independent of how it feels in any given week. The traditions understood this, which is why all of them surrounded the practice with structures, monasteries, schedules, communities, teachers that supported the long-term commitment even when the short-term experience did not. The modern practitioner, attempting the practice without those structures, has to construct the commitment from inside themselves, and this is one of the reasons that consistent practice is so difficult in the modern context. The structures that helped the traditional practitioner continue when continuing did not feel rewarding are largely absent. The modern practitioner has to do the same difficult thing: continue when continuing does not feel rewarding, but without the external supports the traditions provided. What replaces the external supports? Something like trust. Trust in the accumulated reports of the people across centuries who have done the practice and have reported what it produced. Trust in the empirical findings that are beginning to confirm what the traditions claimed. Trust, ultimately, in the structural argument we have been making in this essay, that the practice produces slowly and reliably alterations in the system that produces your life, and that those alterations are worth more than any short-term satisfaction the time spent on the practice could otherwise have produced. The trust is not blind faith. The trust is the rational response to the available evidence. But it is still a trust because the short-term experience of the practice will, for the first considerable time, give you nothing to confirm the trust. The trust has to hold during that period. And the holding of the trust during that period is, in a real sense, the practice itself in another form. The cultivation of the capacity to do what the long-term good requires even when the short-term experience does not reward it, which is a capacity that, once developed, produces benefits across every other domain of life. The practice teaches you, indirectly, how to do the things that produce long-term good. And the learning of that capacity is one of the most valuable side effects the practice produces. If this reached the part of you that has been considering this practice or returning to it, do something now. Comment with these 3 words: I will sit. Just that. Because saying it is the first act, and the first act is the beginning of the commitment. Give this a like if it moved something real. The next video takes this further, into the specific obstacles that practitioners encounter in the early years, and how to navigate them so that the practice can continue long enough to produce what it is capable of producing. It is the practical continuation of everything we just discussed. I will see you there.